He took her to see the sunrise and left her screaming into the wind. But what he didn't know was someone else saw everything, and he wasn't human. It was supposed to be a perfect morning. Clear skies, a gentle breeze. The kind of moment most families would treasure. But for one man in a $1,000 suit and polished shoes, this wasn't a father-daughter bonding day. It was a cover-up, a final decision. The end of what he called a problem. The girl in the wheelchair. Her name was Lila. Just 6 years old, she had a laugh that lit up rooms and legs that had never taken a step. But none of that mattered to her. Her world had always been full of love. Until her mother died. And her father remarried. That's when things changed. This new wife, Sabrina, smiled in public and snarled in private. Lila could feel the cold from her eyes across a room. Her father, once gentle, now looked at her like a burden. And that morning, he dressed her in her favorite cardigan, wheeled her out of the mansion without breakfast, and said only 3 words. Let's go out. Lila, innocent and trusting, thought it would be special. But even as they walked down an unfamiliar forest path, she felt a chill that wasn't from the wind, and nearby, in the far paddock, their white horse, Storm, raised his head. Storm had always sensed things. Lila and Storm were inseparable. The only time she ever smiled, after her mom passed, was with him. He'd nuzzle her, walk beside her chair, even seem to understand her words. That morning he stared hard at her father's back as the man wheeled her toward the cliff. Yes, a cliff. Daddy, this isn't the usual trail, Lila said, trying to stay cheerful. Are we lost? Her father didn't answer. He just pushed, harder. Daddy, my tummy feels weird, she whispered. I want to go home. Still nothing, until they reached the edge. The abyss opened up in front of them, wind howling up from below. Lila's wheels were inches from the drop. Her small fingers tightened on the armrests, then he spoke. You'll finally be free. And with one motion he pushed. The scream that followed wasn't just Lila's. Storm had broken through the fence, galloping at a speed no one had ever seen. But it was too late. The wheelchair was already gone, or so they thought, by some miracle, or fate. The old pine tree growing out the side of the cliff caught the chair by its handles. It dangled, tilting dangerously, Lila's terrified cries echoing against the canyon walls. Storm stood frozen. He knew. Then he turned. He ran. Back to the mansion, past the confused stable hands, through the open gate, until he reached the back porch, where the housekeeper, Maria, had just stepped out with a basket of laundry. Storm neighed, loud, unnatural, like a scream. Maria turned, confused. Then she saw the empty wheelchair harness strapped to his saddle. Her heart sank. Lila? She whispered. Storm neighed again. Something was wrong. Maria dropped the basket and ran. And that's how the story began to unravel. Because animals, they remember. And sometimes they seek justice in ways no one expects. Maria's feet pounded against the estate's marble floors as she raced to find someone, anyone, who might understand the emergency. Her apron flapped behind her as she burst into the main hall where Sabrina was sipping her imported tea. Where is he? Maria shouted, breathless. Sabrina raised a brow. Excuse me? Where is Mr. Dalton? He took Lila this morning. Storm came back without her. And there was blood on the saddle. Sabrina's cup stopped midair. For the first time in months, Maria saw something behind those cold eyes. Fear. I don't know. Maybe they went to town. Maria didn't believe her. She turned and ran, for the stables. Storm was already pawing the ground, his eyes wide, his body trembling. Maria threw a saddle on him without a word, climbed on and whispered, "Show me." He turned, galloped down the same trail and didn't stop until the forest opened up to that deadly cliff. Maria gasped. There, tangled in the branches of the pine, was the wheelchair, and Lila, still alive. Maria scrambled down the slope. tearing her hands and knees on rocks and thorns. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "Hold on, sweetheart, I'm coming." Lila was pale, her small hands gripping the armrests with white knuckles. She looked up, dazed, tears streaking her cheeks. "Maria." "Yes, baby. I'm here." Maria reached her, clutching the chair with one arm and pulling the child into her embrace with the other. The chair creaked ominously, but she held tight. Storm stood above, whinnying until the stable boys came running. One called for an ambulance while another helped Maria carry Lila back up the slope. Every step was a battle, against time, gravity, and fear. Blood trickled from Lila's forehead. She winced with every bump, but her eyes stayed locked on Maria's. Trust, pure trust. When they reached the clearing, Storm paced in circles. His muscles twitched. He looked like he wanted to speak. Maria stroked his mane, whispering, "You saved her, boy. You saved her." The sirens wailed in the distance. Lila's breath was shallow, her pulse weak. The paramedics arrived and loaded her into the ambulance. Maria climbed in after her, never letting go of her tiny hand. Back at the mansion, the silence was suffocating. Sabrina had vanished. Dalton's office was empty. His car was gone. But Maria didn't care. Not now. She stayed by Lila's side, at the hospital, watching the machines beep and blink. Doctors worked to stabilize her. She'd fractured her ribs, suffered a mild concussion, and would need surgery on her spine. But she would live. The media caught wind of the story, first as a bizarre accident, then as something darker. And the white horse who wouldn't stop screaming. He became a symbol, a witness, a hero. Lila's hospital room became a sanctuary of hope and whispers. As days turned into weeks, her strength returned bit by bit. Maria never left her side, reading her stories, brushing her hair, and reminding her that she was safe now. Storm visited, too, once cleared by the doctors, standing quietly outside her window. Lila would press her hand to the glass, and Storm would nuzzle the other side as if to say, "You're not alone." One night, under the soft beep of machines and the hum of moonlight through blinds, Lila asked the question no one had dared answer. "Why did Daddy push me?" Maria's heart cracked. She took Lila's hand and replied, "Because sometimes people forget how to love. But that doesn't mean you're unlovable." As the investigation deepened, so did the secrets. It turned out, Dalton had a hidden debt, massive business failures masked by fake success. Sabrina had married him for his name, not his fortune, which was already crumbling. The only thing standing between them and financial ruin was Lila's trust fund. But there was one problem. The trust couldn't be touched unless Lila was gone. Detectives unearthed falsified medical records and tampered documents. Sabrina's digital footprint revealed searches like disability law inheritance loopholes and life insurance for dependents. Lila, meanwhile, began her physical therapy. She was determined. Every session, every stretch, every painful moment, she faced it head on. Maria pushed her, encouraged her, cheered louder than anyone. And one day, nearly 3 months after the fall, Lila moved her toes. The room erupted. Maria cried. The nurses clapped. Storm, hearing the cheers from the courtyard, neighed loudly. Word spread. The little girl who'd survived the cliff and the betrayal was walking again, one slow, shaky step at a time. Justice came in more ways than one. Dalton was arrested at the border trying to flee. Sabrina was caught days later trying to empty a safe deposit box filled with fake IDs and passports. In court, Lila testified via video, calm, brave, unshaken. "I'm not broken," she said, voice steady. "And I remember everything." The jury didn't take long. Both were sentenced, decades behind bars. Lila went home with Maria. The mansion, sold. The money, donated to charities for abused children and animal rescues. Storm, he had his own stall, next to Lila's new window. She'd wake up to his soft snorts and sleep with his silhouette nearby. Because some animals don't just remember. They protect, they love, and they never forget. Years passed. Lila grew from a fragile, soft-spoken survivor into a poised, confident teenager with a purpose. The scars on her body faded slowly, but the strength in her heart only deepened. The girl who had once been tossed from a cliff became a national symbol of courage and resilience. She began speaking at schools, events, and children's hospitals. Not about her fall, but about healing. About what it means to be left behind and still find the strength to stand up. And behind her, always, Storm. Now older, but still regal. He'd follow her to speaking events, standing near the stage, silent and proud. Maria remained her guardian, but by now she was family. She encouraged Lila to follow her dreams even when they stretched beyond the safety of the farmhouse. At 16, Lila received a letter, thick cream envelope, gold trim, an invitation. A private academy for gifted teens had heard her speak. They offered her a full scholarship. Maria hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready?" Lila smiled. "I was ready the day I stopped being afraid." The academy was different. Grand halls, endless staircases, faces that didn't recognize her. But Lila was no longer a shadow in someone else's life. She walked in with her head high, sometimes on crutches, sometimes in her chair, but never with shame. She made friends. Real ones. She even started a club. Voices That Rise. A safe space for students who felt unseen. But not everything was behind her. Late one evening, walking back from the library, she heard whispers behind a hallway door. Her name. A voice. Familiar and chilling, she leaned closer. We were supposed to be done with her years ago. If she keeps talking, it's going to bring everything down. She froze. That voice, it couldn't be. But it was. Sabrina had a brother. No one had known. He'd changed his name, slipped into the city, and he worked at the academy. Lila backed away slowly. Her heart pounded. She needed to tell someone. But who would believe her? So she did what she always did. She wrote it down. And Storm had been watching from the gate. Even older now, his legs slower, but his eyes sharp. He knew what he'd heard, because some animals don't just remember the past. They wait for the moment to protect the future. The next morning, Lila walked straight to the dean's office. Her journal clutched in her trembling hands. She didn't want to be afraid again. Not ever. She laid the book on the desk, open to the page she'd written in her neat, flowing script. Every detail of the conversation she'd overheard. The name, the threat, and her history. The dean read in silence, his fingers tightening, with every sentence. Lila. Are you absolutely certain? Yes. Her voice didn't waver. And I want it on record before he tries to silence me again. That single act triggered a chain reaction. The man, whose name was now Lucas Hayes, was placed on temporary leave. An internal investigation began, and Lila was assigned protective supervision. But it didn't end there, because Lila didn't just want to be protected. She wanted to know why someone was still targeting her. Why the past refused to stay buried. So she dug. With Maria's help, she combed through old family files, forgotten ledgers, estate plans. What she found made her hands tremble. Dalton had been working with a network of corrupt financial brokers. People who preyed on wealthy families with disabled heirs, recommending solutions that were anything but humane. And Lucas? He wasn't just Sabrina's brother. He had written one of the white papers used to justify the cover-ups. Lila took the files straight to the authorities. A new investigation launched, one that expanded far beyond her father. Other families stepped forward, other victims. It became a national case, hidden crimes tied to greed and cruelty. Lila was invited to testify before a federal committee. She stood in a tailored blazer, her hair braided neatly, Storm's horseshoe hanging from a necklace around her neck. She told them everything. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. I'm not here because I'm brave, she said. I'm here because silence helps no one. And the truth? The truth deserves to live. The committee applauded. Journalists wrote headlines. Girl who fell now leads thousands. Schools launched new protections. Funding went into disability justice. And one rainy afternoon, as she walked across the stage at graduation, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Maria sobbed. Storm neighed from the fence. Lila was no longer just the girl who survived. She had become the voice that roared. And Storm, the horse who never forgot, stood proud. Because justice, when it finally comes, doesn't gallop, it walks. Steady, silent, and unforgettable. Years later, Lila stood on the open land where the mansion once towered. It had been demolished, the ashes of its cruelty cleared away. In its place now stood something new, something built not from greed, but from grace. A sprawling center for abused and disabled children, where therapy came not just from people, but from animals, especially horses. Each child had a story. Each child had scars. But here they learned that being broken didn't mean being less. Storm had passed peacefully years before, his head in Lila's lap, her tears soaking into his snowy mane. They buried him beneath the tallest oak and planted wildflowers around, his resting place. Every spring, they bloomed brighter than the year before. A bronze statue now stood in the center of the sanctuary courtyard, Storm rearing back, fierce and strong, Lila by his side, one hand on his neck, the other raised toward the sun. The plaque below read, "To the ones who saw what others wouldn't, to the ones who stood when the world turned away." Maria, older now but still full of warmth, served as the sanctuary's heart, guiding, teaching, comforting. Lila called. Her mom in every room, every speech, every story. The children who came to the sanctuary left different than when they arrived. They left with light in their eyes, hope in their hearts, and strength in their spines. And Lila? She wrote books, gave talks, fought for legislation. But every day she walked the fields barefoot, whispering to the horses, remembering the one who started it all. Sometimes she'd feel the wind shift and swear she heard Storm's hooves on the soil. Because some memories don't fade. They grow, they gallop beside us, and they carry us home.